Welcome to Mystere Creations. I'm your host, AJ, and today I'm speaking with David Milarch of the Ancient Tree Archive. We had some audio troubles due to a storm, which cut out some of the audio and created some distortions. Sorry for that. I did my best to fix the audio. Trees are our protectors, and in this episode, you'll learn a bit more about trees and their life cycle. The importance of old-growth forest is evident in our discussion. Please enjoy.
All right. The reason I sent you that video, that was our last expedition.
Excellent.
That kind of gives you a thumbnail sketch of why we've been doing this for 30 years. Just to get ready for times like now that we're entering into.
Yeah.
But, we're going to lose most of the world's forests, according to some experts.
Okay.
For various reasons. And, of course, those fires in the sequoia were absolutely devastating. And I would say British Columbia is up the bat here pretty soon.
We got hit pretty hard last year.
That was just the beginning. It's,
yeah.
God forbid, but, it's... globally, every forest that I know of globally is in the same situation. This climate change challenge and drought and what we've done to affect the planet is global. It's not just in British Columbia or Michigan or California. The fires in Australia have been epic. The fires they've had last couple of years in Europe are epic. I think it was 120 degrees in British Columbia last summer, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's 49 degrees Celsius, which I think is close to 120.
It was 112 in San Francisco last summer. And like Mark Twain said, the coldest winter I ever spent was in San Francisco. It is, and we're just heading into it. It's just, it's time we all take action, or I'm not sure what the outcome might be, but. All right. If you would watch that.
Yeah.
And I think that, there was the world's first of hooking up a 2,500-year-old sequoia to that piece of electronic equipment, picking up its energy impulses and converting that into music and playing that music to 40 school children as a beginning to have people, and especially children, understand that trees talk to us and they understand when we're talking to them, and they respond to each individual especially. And that was the first, I think, that's ever been filmed. 2,500-year-old giant sequoia talking and playing music with our crew. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
I wonder, because our forest and other forests are connected through the mycelial network.
Yes.
I wonder if they communicate through that network as well.
There's several networks that trees communicate through. I think it was around 10 or 12 years ago when Jim Robbins, who's a New York Times Science Times reporter, global, followed us around in Europe and here in the United States to gather information for the book that he wrote about the project. I was trying to explain to Jim that Native people, indigenous people all over the world have been talking to trees and listening to trees for millennia. It's only the arrogant Europeans that didn't honor that and haven't practiced that. But we're beginning to, collect science, which Jim has in his book, The Man Who Planted Trees, of how trees communicate with us and how they do communicate. When we talk to them or we touch them or we harm them, they understand. So we're trying to enlighten, so to speak, young people and school children all over the world that trees feel pain, They communicate freely with each other and with humans. They do understand and recognize who we are. And there's important messages that those 3,000 or 4,000 year old trees are trying to give us. And I think it's high time that we facilitate that education of our young people to have the ability to speak to trees and to listen to trees for the wisdom of nature. That's one of our goals.
I think in Europe, they fought so hard against nature because nature was harsh back in the Dark Ages. It was so harsh to them that they pushed away all of that thinking. And they've created this problem where there's a disconnect. It needs to get back to...
Religions did that also.
Yeah.
Religion started back, 1,000 years ago. Man is to dominate the earth. We're to dominate nature. That's not the intention of the Quran or the Bible. We're not to dominate anybody or anything. We're to take care of it, to nurture, work with nature, not dominate it, and use nature for whatever financial whim that we choose.
Well, that's what got us to this point.
Yeah. Well, we need to fix that.
We need to fix it quick. All right. I have some questions here for you.
Sure.
All right. Can you explain to everyone what it means when you say clone a tree and what is the process?
Yes. Cloning a tree is our way of assisting that tree or asking that tree to reproduce itself. The vast majority of all the species of trees are self-cloning. They've been doing it for millions of years. It's only as we have come along and asked the trees to allow us to clone them that we've run into resistance, especially with trees of great age. But I would like to remind people that every day you eat clones, you drink clones. Clones are a part of our life, and that's not a negative word. All good wines are clones. Our vegetables and our fruits are clones. Most of the people that consume protein or meat, a lot of the animals have been selected genetically for the traits that we're looking for. So clones are a part of everyone's life. Most of us just don't stop and think about it. So why do we want to clone trees? Well, here in the United States, 98% of our old growth forest has been cut down. There's 2% left. In the case of the redwoods, 96% of all coast redwoods have been cut down. There's only 4% of those left. So why we are doing this is to capture the DNA, the encoding of how these trees were able to attain such great age. One fact, most redwoods, the vast majority of coast redwoods don't live to be 1,000 years old. But the ones that we're targeting are 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and science has no idea how trees can attain that great age. But when we have the science and when we have computers and when we have the will to unravel the DNA, those secrets of survival are in there. We think that's critically important for us to know how those trees were able to take everything Mother Nature threw at them for millennia, how to live through the entire industrial age or everything man's thrown at them. Mm-hmm. And just besides luck, not getting cut down, what are those secrets to longevity? What are those secrets to, for certain, the droughts that they've experienced in their lifetimes? And how could we apply that knowledge to this time when drought and increased temperatures are threatening the forests of the world? We think it's important to save those genetics, study those genetics when we have the time and the computers and the funding to do so, and maybe take some of those genetics traits for drought and heat resistance to help us in what our children and grandchildren are facing.
That's it's necessary to do this. Um, I've seen a lot of loss in the last year with the flooding because of climate change. Um, how has that affected your processes?
Well, every coastline of every country, but especially islands, are being threatened as we speak. There are some islands in the Pacific, I understand, that all of the people that live there have had to move off the islands because of flooding. I have friends in Miami, Florida, that on high tide, the streets are starting to flood in Miami on high tide. The Florida, 3/4 of Florida is going to be underwater in 50 years. So the West Coast, British Columbia, along the Pacific, they're not immune to the rise in the seas. So what are we going to do about it? We know we're going to lose the trees along the coastline. And some of the world's more important trees live along that coastline. So are we going to just stand by like we have for the last several hundred years and watch trees die? Just stand there and say, yes, this tree is 3,000 years old. It's an ancient tree, but it's come to the end of its lifetime, and we'll love it and watch it until it dies and tips over. Or are we going to say, hey, we can prolong this tree's life. We can go in and we can take simple cuttings from the top of that tree or through micropropagation, and this tree can live on for several thousand more years. Now, we do know that it has lived 2 or 3 times longer than almost all of its family has. We know that it's been through droughts and tests of nature that one could only imagine in 3,000 years. Maybe those traits are important for us now to introduce into some of our native forests that are standing, reintroduce old growth genetics, and to certainly make trees that have a greater odds of surviving the onslaught that we're starting into with temperature rise, with droughts, with diseases that are unchecked coming into North America. It just makes good sense to preserve those genetics, study those genetics, and reintroduce those genetics, or for the first time, be able to rebuild an old growth forest that's been cut down. If 96% of all the redwoods are cut down and 98% of the old growth forests, are we just going to stand there and wring our hands and say, oh, well, it's too bad we cut down all those mother trees. Oh, well, there's nothing we can do. We really screwed up. We cut them down before we studied them and understood what they do. Or are we going to have a concerted effort here at the 11th hour and preserve the great genetics of these great trees so they can be utilized? That's where we stand. That's what we do at Archangel Ancient Trees.
Okay. I really respect that. We need more of you. We need more people doing what you're doing to rebuild old growth forest, particularly here in on Vancouver Island. I've, in the last 2 years, in traveling the island a little bit, we've seen a lot of old growth forests leveled, just clear cut, because the government's allowing it to happen. We have people like myself, like David Suzuki, who are all fighting to get the government to realize what they're doing. What would you suggest to the individual to do to help you do your job?
Get a hold of your government officials on a local level, on a provincial level, and on a national level. Let them know that, in large part, those are the world's trees, not to be sold off for the highest bidder and turned into profit. There's an article coming up by Jim Robbins, who wrote the book, The Man Who Planted Trees, who's interviewed the great climate scientists of the world, the great dendrologists of the world. And there's a new article coming out, why old growth ancient trees are critically important to the health and longevity of our forests. Okay, man's greed seems to know no limit. And if there's a buck in it, somebody along the line, doesn't matter what life is lost or at what cost, they're going to convert that into personal wealth. The people listening, you have power, you have a vote. You have the ability to write letters. You have abilities to make phone calls. They'll continue doing it as long as the people and we, the people, have the power. There's a lot more of us. And let your politicians express why they have no business converting ancient trees that have been around for hundreds, sometimes thousands of years into greed and profit. It's time to take action. Again, if we just stand there and watch things go and bitch and moan and things and do nothing, well, then we're part of the problem. It's time to stand up, take action, write a letter, make some phone calls, and protest what we know is a gross injustice to nature. That's what I'd suggest.
It's true. Can you explain to everyone about sprouts that grow out of supposedly dead redwood stumps and how that works?
Yes. Those are called Basil Sprouts. And many, many different species of trees will throw up Basil Sprouts either off the bottom of the trunk or from their root system at the time of their demise, whether it's been man and his chainsaw or through natural attrition of the tree ending its life. Before it leaves, it'll throw out Basil Sprouts. In the case of redwoods, they'll do it in what they call a fairy ring, or a circle 15 to 20 feet in diameter around the base of the tree sent up by the roots. So that tree, as it's leaving, it'll have several of its clones, its self-cloning, that will continue the life of that tree. And I've seen trees from fairy rings of fairy rings of fairy rings. And so the tree that we see today with our eyes is an 8,000-year-old version of the original. So many trees, to guarantee their survivability, will throw those Basil Sprouts up at the time of their demise. It's pretty fascinating. So what we've done is we've gone to these Basil Sprouts, checked them with DNA to make sure they're of the parent, and we'll use those for our cloning. Harvest 30 or 40 pieces, 2 or 3 inches long, of that tree, bring it back to the lab and reproduce it. So it brings no harm to the tree. And in some cases, with coast redwoods, we found a lost valley of stumps. Trees, coast redwoods that were 30 to 35 foot in diameter across. Okay, those trees were probably 4,000 years old, probably nearly 400 feet high. Those coast redwoods were bigger than the sequoia, so hold the presses, we need to change our history books. And they got cut down in the mid 1800s and lost. Nobody knew coast redwoods could grow that big or that old. Everyone thought that sequoias were the biggest, oldest trees. They're not. But we found this lost valley of stumps in Northern California. And believe it or not, they had thrown up Basil Sprouts. We tried to clone those, and I'm happy to say that the world's largest and oldest trees known are now living on in 7 countries protected of 4,400 feet tall coast redwoods. So that's what we, that's what we advocate. So just standing around watching our ancient forests get cut down or destroyed with fire or with drought, we're proactive, and you can do it there in Canada too. We can teach you how to do that. We would be glad to come there and teach you. If you could, we're a nonprofit. If you have the funding, we'd be glad to come up and start help preserving and protecting the genetics of your great trees. We have many, many, many requests for British Columbia and parts of Canada for our redwoods and sequoias and our oaks. But the Canadian government won't allow us to ship them across the national border. But we could build archival living libraries of the great genetics of the trees of Canada if someone that had some funding to help us come up and show you how to do it, you too could build your archive. But probably the most important gift, or at least one of them that you could give your children and your grandchildren, is help preserve and protect the genetics of the great trees so they can be utilized in the future.
I'll have to get a hold of David Suzuki and get his foundation involved in that, because he's been gathering funds for fighting the government over this. So we could allocate some of those funds to producing our own archive.
Well, if people go to our website at Archangel Ancient Trees, just Google up Archangel Ancient Trees, and you'll get to our website. We would be glad to help our Canadian brothers and sisters help preserve and protect their ancient forests, to help clone and preserve the genetics of the last great trees before your timber company get every single one of them. They will, if they're allowed to, and help your children and your grandchildren have tools, the tools of trees that have been through these kind of droughts, that have been through these kind of temperature swings, that have been through the attack of the diseases, and they're several hundred, several thousand year lifetime, and make millions and millions and millions of these trees that your school children can help replant. All right, so we've made mistakes. We've cut down 98% of our old growth forests here in the United States. In Europe, it's 99.5% it's been cut down. Are we just going to stand there and do nothing? Say, well, everybody screwed up. There's nothing we can do. That's not true. Archangel's here to help show the world a model of how you can rebuild old growth forests. And it's high time that we all, in a concerted effort, every single man, woman, and child on this planet, we get busy and do just that. Because I believe that with the help of the trees and our efforts, we can reverse climate change.
We could.
All's not lost, but if we do nothing, then I think it just may well be that way.
We'll be right back. I wonder if for every child in the world we planted a tree, would we be able to do that?
If every man, woman, and child on this planet planted 2 trees a year and watered them and helped nurture them for a few years to keep them going, but every year, every single human being planted trees, in 20 years, we could reverse climate change dramatically back to a level that's acceptable for human life. The math is there. The new math is there, but we can't use just any trees. We know that sequoias and redwoods sequester CO2 about 10 times faster than normal trees. So we need to get the workhorses, the trees that sequester CO2, the strongest, the hardiest, the fastest sequesters of carbon, and I might add, the greatest producers of oxygen, which we need desperately. Our mammals can't even reproduce in our oceans effectively because the O2 level is so low. But there are things we can do about all of this. And if you like more hard science on this instead of just my opinion, I urge you to get the book, The Man Who Planted Trees by Jim Robbins. Jim Robbins is a New York Times science reporter, and his footnoted book on great trees and ancient trees and genetics and the experiments going on around the world. Anybody that reads that book, we've heard many, many, many people from all over the world say, I finally feel hopeful for once in years. I don't get any revenue from it. Archangel doesn't get any revenue from it. But I highly suggest you read that book. And there's concrete things that you can do, and every listener can do right now, and reasons why you should do it. Help start turning this thing around. That's one thing. And you can find that book on our website, or you can find it online. But get the hard science.
Yeah.
Read about the scientists and the people around the world that are taking action and getting traction and helping. Do something. Either lead, follow, or get the heck out of the way. Isn't that what the saying says?
Yeah. Can you explain to us the assistance migration program?
Yes. Science has taught me and taught us that most species of trees can migrate about 1 foot a year. So your great forests, our great forests, the great forests of the world, the fastest trees can migrate to a cooler, more moist area. It's 1 foot a year. That's not going to do it. So let's just take, for example, we've done 130 different species of trees in Europe, in the United States. Well, let's just take sequoias. We replanted the world's first old-growth sequoia forest at the Presidio in San Francisco, and up in the mountains, the Sierra Nevadas, where fire destroyed one of the greatest, oldest stands of sequoias. Half of that forest burned down 2 years ago. Half the houses are up there. And with 40 school children, we started replanting old-growth sequoias there and at the Presidio to show the world that we can help fix it. And we know that it's getting so hot and so dry that all the sequoias in California probably aren't going to make it. And we know now that especially the southern half of the 500-mile range of those redwoods are not going to make it. It's too damn hot and dry. So what we're doing is we're going up to Seattle. In the Seattle, the Puget Sound area, we've planted our clone trees and living libraries in over 35 cities in that area. We would love to plant our redwoods and our sequoias from 500 to 700 miles south up where you people live, because it still rains up there. You still have coastal fog. It's cooler. So we're here to help the trees that can't help themselves quick enough because of what we're experiencing. But the government won't let us get our trees into your country. But if we take tissue culture of our trees, that's allowed to come in. Find a tissue culture lab there in British Columbia or somewhere. We can propagate those trees and start to reforest your country, those coastlines, especially Vancouver Island that has been devastated in the last 2 or 3 years, and start to help work with Mother Nature and help fix it and teach our children how to do that and fix it. It's not all lost, but we need to start taking a concerted action now.
It's true. Very much. What's the oldest tree you've ever cloned?
Well, the Bristlecone Pine in the White Mountains. The Bristlecone Pine are at 11,000 feet. It looks like Mars up there. And the bristlecones look more dead than alive. And Methuselah is the oldest bristlecone pine known. It's over 5,000 years old, and we worked on that. And that's probably the oldest one that we've done that we know of. But some of these redwoods that are, the third or fourth generation due to self-cloning fairy rings are probably, I would say 30 or 40,000 years old or older. But we have a collection of sequoias that are all over 3,000 years old. Imagine that. When Jesus walked the earth, those trees were already 1,000 years old.
Jeez.
Can you get your head around that?
It doesn't compute that something could be that old, but yeah, I can get my head around that. I think we need to get back to nature a bit more than what we have been. This disconnect is really not great.
We know now with new science that's only a year or two old, that we need these ancient trees in all forests to pass along through their pollen to the younger generation of trees their inherent traits of being able to resist climate change, temperature change, drought. So they need to cross-pollinate with the younger forest to introduce those genetics, that DNA into the younger forest. It's been absolutely insane to go in and cut down the mother trees and the biggest, oldest trees, because there we've shot ourselves in the foot by not allowing them to pass along these thousands of year old genetics and inherent traits to be able to resist climate change and all of its ramifications. It's just there's new science coming out and new things about that this year. Probably the worst thing we could have done to our forest is eliminate the mother trees and the pollen sources from the ancient trees that help recreate a genetically strong forest. But if they're not there, they can't pass it along. It's God help us, what have we done?
It's true. Could you tell us a little bit about your Supergrove in Oregon?
Well, we have several, but let's go to Eugene. 3 years ago in Eugene, Oregon, they called and said, we would like to plant giant sequoias around town, in our parks, in our areas, to offset the CO2 we're hosting the World Games in 2022. So as we host the World Games, of course, there could be more airlines, more cars. We're gonna produce a lot of CO2 and use up a lot of O2. And we would like to offset that with planting giant sequoias. Could you help us by donating 2,022 giant sequoias from these 3,000 or 4,000-year-old giants that you've cloned to help us offset the carbon because of the World Games? We said we'd love to. We're a nonprofit. We're not Santa Claus. We need some financial assistance so that shipping and handling and reproducing more, making more to replace them. So we worked out a strategy, and I would encourage anyone to go to Eugene, Oregon, to drive around town and see what thousands and thousands of giant sequoias that are now 10 or 12 feet tall look like to reforest the city. You could use those trees in a lot of your cities in British Columbia and Canada, as well as the redwoods. So that would be a shining example to the world of how do we offset CO2 generation. That's one way to do it. Another place is the Presidio. The Presidio is an old military base that is on the highest price real estate in the San Francisco Bay Area, up on the high bluffs. And ever since George Washington's time, it's one of our former presidents, up until about 30 years ago, it is a military base. That was shut down. And to build that military base, most of San Francisco and Oakland, California, we cut down old growth redwood forests to do it. So anybody that's been to San Francisco or Oakland that's drove around or enjoyed it there, you're driving through an old growth redwood and sequoia forest, whether you know it or not.
Okay.
But it sure as hell doesn't look like it these days. So the Presidio said, could you help us rebuild an old growth redwood and sequoia forest on our grounds? So there again, 3 years ago, we said, sure. So we started sending them clones of our 2,000 to 3,000-year-old coast redwoods, our 3,000 to 4,000-year-old sequoias. And we stressed that only use clones at a 10% reforestation rate. You need to use 90% seedlings for genetic variety, and only 10% of these clones to cross-pollinate and reintroduce old growth genetics. And that's exactly what we're doing. And we did that, the second phase of that last October. And CNN and AP sent that story out around the world because we almost always try and utilize school children to do the reforestation with this so that they learn, so that we teach the children what it is that we do and why. And so that would be another forest. And we have requests to be able to do that in forests all over the world, but we're a nonprofit. We can only do what people are generous enough to help us do. And it sure would be nice to go up to Vancouver Island and help restore and repair the devastation that's been done there. But if someone has the ways and the means and thinks that's important, there are ways that we could do that. Just get a hold of us through our website. And we've been waiting and waiting, and let's do it together. Let's teach your children how to do what we do.
We need to do that.
Then let's do it. What better investment environmentally could you make than to help facilitate replanting an old growth redwood or sequoia forest that will pay it forward for the next 2,000 to 3,000 years? So the money you spend now and the effort for the next 2,000 or 3,000 years, 24/7, it'll be paying dividends. I'd say that's a pretty good investment of your money.
Yeah, it's a huge investment for the possibility of being able to just live our life.
Well, it gives our grandchildren a fighting chance of being able to live on this planet. And it's looking pretty murky right now that in 100 years, any human beings will be able to survive the planet.
True.
That doesn't need to be that way.
No.
If we stand around and do nothing, it will be. But if we all get busy and do a little something, all of us together, we can turn this thing around.
Could you talk about a number of trees we haven't touched on that you're doing cloning for?
12 years ago, we asked people to help create a list of the world trees, the 100 most effective CO2 sequestering, disease-resistant trees. And so we asked Diana Beresford Kroger, she's Canadian, from Eastern Canada, and she's a world authority on world trees, to help create this list with Dr. Bill Libby, God with the world's most authority on redwoods. He's from UC. We paid them to create this list of the world's 100 most important trees to preserve, to assure humans being able to live on the planet. So they created that list 12 years ago. They're the best that we could find in the world. And that's our marching orders, country by country by continent, that list of the world's 100 most important trees. Several of those trees are in Kansas, in British Columbia. So if people are interested in that list, we would be glad to go over it. It's hard to cover that list right now in a short time speaking venue, but if you go to our website,
okay,
thanks to Indians, you helped create it.
Yeah. At least we've done something good. Can you tell us about some of the trees that we haven't discussed that are on that list of trees?
Yes. The pines, we have not done much work in the pines and the Doug fir. You find the biggest, longest lived, healthiest firs and pines from the Pacific Northwest and start to preserve their genetics. If you go to our website, Archangel Ancient Trees, or if you get a hold of us and ask this question, we can send you a short list of the trees that that we're following marching orders. Like I said, from Diana Beresford Kroger, a Canadian, near genius in forestry, and Bill Libby. There's a list that we're following. It would be easier if you just go online and take a look at those trees on our list.
Okay.
But what can we do? I mean, what can a 5-year-old do? What can a 105-year-old do daily to help reverse this situation we find ourselves in? There's many things we can all do every day. Number one, we can educate ourselves on the facts. Okay. Number two, we can pull our heads up out of the sand and start to do things based on the new science. That a simple thing like every day we purchase things, food, clothing, our credit card, our checks, make more environmentally balanced purchases with the power that we all have. And we have the power, it's called money. Okay? Educate yourself on the decisions of why you buy what it is you buy. And are you contributing to the problem to help solve those problems? Number two, if you go to our web, you'll see that we have what we call tree school, where from kindergarten all the way up through university level, we teach classes and children, your children or the children of the world, how to do it is exactly what we do. We don't hide any of our practices. We don't try and be unique by not sharing our information or our wisdom. we could get your school children involved in classes, tree school classes, and help teach them how to clone these trees, how to make trees in their little classes, and how to take care of them and how to plant them. And they take ownership. It empowers them and they take ownership.
Is there anything you'd like to discuss that you're doing project-wise that you want to promote?
We would very, very much like to be able to do what we do, rebuild sequoia, Doug fir forests, especially Columbia. We've replanted our trees in 35 cities around Puget Sound, but we've tried over and over again to get our trees across the border, and for a reason, if someone listening had the ways and the means or the money to entertain the idea of bringing us up there for a while to show you and teach you how to do it is what we do with our ancient trees, with your ancient trees, and start to reproduce them and get them in the hands of your school children and start to replant old growth forests and destroy it. That would be our most sincere wish because, you know, we're working on the entire West Coast until you hit the Canadian border and bang, all things have to stop. Well, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We are underfunded for the year, but we've tried heartily to help throw our in Vancouver Island and also in British Columbia to help alleviate a lot of the pressure up there. If you go to our website, give us a call, write us an email, and let's try and figure out a way that we can cross the border and come across and help you, teach you how to help them also, and get Canada involved in preserving and protecting your old growth forests and using them. We're all in this together.
Yes, we are. I want to thank David for spending some of his precious time with me. After the interview, they took me on a virtual tour of their facility. It was beautiful, and I got to meet some of his crew. And if you have the opportunity, please help the project. It's vitally important. Again, please like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.